Welcome to the first ever episode of Cornversations. I am your host, Becks, and I am just delighted to have you here listening today. Wherever you're coming from, whoever you are, you probably know who I am, but we're happy to have you either way. We're just going to jump right into it here without too much to talk about today, to be honest with you, but we'll break it down for you real quickly here. This episode is going to be broken into two parts. We're going to go through the basics about what Cornversation is and what you can expect moving forward. And then as a treat for listening to what essentially will be a syllabus day, I'll share something with you that if you are a fan or have read my blog, Around the Corn Sports blog, you understand that with college football previews that I release every year, I do not typically give my predictions for who I think will end up in the playoff. And that's going to be the treat today on Cornversations, is we'll run through the 12 teams that I think are going to end up in the 2025-2026 college football playoff. So just as a caveat, I want to warn you guys that this is going to be a little bit of a rough liftoff. This is obviously my first podcast ever. I have no editing experience whatsoever and do not intend to edit this. This is being done on a one-take basis, and I am recording this on a Friday afternoon. It is going to be released on a Friday afternoon, August 29th, and we're just going to see how things go. Hopefully it isn't so bad that the plane crashes or that you just try and jump off the ride. But I can tell you one thing, if you do stay on with us, it's not going to land anytime soon, so it should be a fun ride moving forward. But we'll go ahead and we'll just start with question number one, housekeeping question number one, that I'm sure those of you who do not know Becks are asking, which is, what is Cornversations? And in its most blunt form, Cornversations is a sports podcast. I know, we do not have enough of those on the internet today, and we're going to add one more of them. But how is it different is the real question. And that's where I'd like to introduce my ideal state for this podcast, which is meaningful conversations about meaningful topics. And what that means is I'm going to try my best, and I'm going to try my best when I do potentially have guests on in the future, to eliminate the sensationalism that I see and that I hear in other media outlets today with regards to sports. You know, sports is entertainment, so I get it. I understand that there's passion, and with that comes sometimes the sensationalism that we see. But it has gotten to a point where I think it's actually taking away from what we see on the field, from what we see on the court, from what we see from the actual action happening. And that's the real reason why I'm a sports fan, is for that. You know, I don't look at it like a drama or something along those lines. So that's what Cornversations is going to try to be. Hopefully it'll keep you coming back a little bit, 30 for 30, a little bit outside the lines, if you remember those shows, but still our own, still something that we're going to try to make worthwhile to come back. So the next question, and you may have gotten the wrong impression based on what this is right now, but will Cornversations be a solo podcast, or is this going to be something that's going to have guests? And I'll answer this question in two ways. Number one is it's flexible. It will be solo at points. The reality is I'm broadcasting quasi-live from my office bedroom, and I only have one mic, so there isn't the ability at the moment to have guests on, at least in person with me, to do back and forth sparring. But the intention is that we will have guests, and it'll be a rotating panel of guests. So we're going to have people on that'll be giving their perspective on the interesting topics that we'll be covering. And additionally, we do have media outlets, an email address that hopefully we'll be able to utilize as a mailbag of sorts. So if you've got something you'd like to say, reach out to the podcast. We're cornversationspod@gmail.com and drop us a line. Tell us what you want to hear on this. Give us some constructive feedback. I'm sure there will be a lot of it, at least up front. And let us know how this show can be something that you want to come back to time and time again. The next question I've got here written down, and these are written down, so these are not off the dome, but will the podcast be audio only, or will it also incorporate video? And this one's a little bit tougher for me to say it's going to be flexible, because the reality is, at the moment, it is intended to only be an audio podcast. I really don't know if I see the value yet for a video podcast. Again, if that's something that you would see value in as a listener, go ahead and drop me a line, cornversationspod@gmail.com, and let me know that, and we can try to figure something out. As I'm a novice in terms of podcasting, and obviously with video editing, that would be something that would be totally new for me as well. It's something that would probably be pretty rough from the onset, but if it's something that can be beneficial, we'll definitely give it some thought. And then lastly, contact info. That's something that I've already talked about a couple of times already, cornversationspod@gmail.com. We're also on socials. You can find us on Facebook. We're going to have an Instagram up soon. We'll have a Twitter account that'll be posting things as well. So there will be lots of ways to interact with the pod. And that's really what we would like to see, is interaction, because without the interaction, it's just me talking into a mic. But now that we've got that out of the way, I think it's time to get into the actual meat of the episode, which is the 2025-2026 college football playoff predictions. And if you have not had a chance to read the articles on Around the Corn Sports blog, go check those out. Cornversations is a collaboration of sorts with that blog, and what this podcast should be able to do is bring us into the 21st century. For those of you that have followed Around the Corn Sports blog for some time and checked out the articles already, you probably noticed that there's a new layout. We're pretty excited about that. It makes it look like an actual blog and not something that has been sitting around since the 1990s. So definitely go check that out if you haven't yet. And if you have, then you probably already know what all of my predictions are for each conference. And that's a big thing here in terms of what I am predicting for the college football playoff, because we obviously are going to have automatic bids, and there are some conferences that are going to get a number of bids as at-larges as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with number 12, because this one was actually looking like a very bad pick as of yesterday. That's the challenge when you release something like a podcast and it's a timely topic and you don't do it in time for the beginning of the event. So without any more rambling, we'll go ahead and we'll just give it to you. Number 12 is Boise State. I did have the Broncos running it back and making back-to-back playoff appearances this year. Unfortunately, they were obliterated down in South Florida yesterday, and it brings up some real questions about whether or not Boise State will be able to handle their conference schedule, let alone the non-conference schedule that they have left, which includes a trip to Notre Dame in October. But with the Broncos, it's going to be difficult for them to recover from that loss. They were coming in at number 25 on the year, but a 27-point loss is going to be difficult for anybody to overcome, let alone someone who is playing in a G5 conference. I did see a lot of challenges from the Boise State offense trying to figure out an answer for the loss of Ashton Jainty last night. It appears that the Broncos are going to do what they want to do, which is run the ball. But as South Florida showed, really, it's going to be tough to do that if they don't have the personnel. And Maddox Madsen was a guy who was lauded for doing all the right things last season. Ashton Jainty probably had a lot to do with that. When Madsen was challenged last night and put in positions in 3rd and long where he had to throw the ball, he really did not look all that great. So it's going to be tough for the Broncos to take that number 12 spot. However, I do think that whoever the G5 champion is this year that makes the playoff, they're going to end up in that number 12 spot. So it doesn't completely wreck my predictions, but it likely is not going to be Boise State. But we are going to just turn things around quickly, though, and start from the top after that, because none of the rest of these teams have played their first game of the season. And number 1 and number 2, I actually have running the table during the regular season. And I get it. That's going to be difficult for these teams to do, for any team to do, for that matter. But when you look at these two team schedules, I think that they have the ability to do that, to run the table and to lock up the top 2 spots in the playoff this season. As we know, the playoff is going to be dictated by the rankings at the end of the season, rather than having automatic spots for the top 4 based on conference champions. So this will give an opportunity for teams that have great seasons to lock up higher seeds than they would have in the playoff under its format last year. So those top 2 teams I've got, who I have finishing 13-0 and 12-0 during the regular season, are the Penn State Nittany Lions and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I've got Penn State at number 1 and Notre Dame at number 2. Now, these two teams are coming in with a lot of talent returning from last year's squad, and that's really the reason why I think they have the opportunity to do great things during the regular season and then also in the playoff once we get there. Penn State in particular reminds me a lot of Ohio State's squad last year that ended up winning the national title. They've got a 2-headed monster running back. They've got a capable quarterback who shouldn't be making too many mistakes and has a lot of experience compared to some of the other contenders this year. And despite some losses on the defensive side, I really think Penn State is going to be one of the best on that end as well. They've obviously got Ohio State's defensive coordinator from last season, Jim Knowles, who's going to be joining the Nittany Lions this year. So it's going to be interesting to see how Penn State handles all of the expectations that come with it. I think that most people are pretty high on them, unless you're located in Columbus, Ohio. But I do think they have the ability to get the job done during the regular season this year. Notre Dame is also an interesting case. They've got a tough schedule. There's a number of landmines on there, so it might be a stretch to say that they could run the table, but I do like what they have coming back. I think Marcus Freeman has established an excellent culture, and they're going to do what they know how to do offensively and probably get the job done a little bit better than a team like Boise State was able to yesterday. Now, some of that is due to the fact that guys like Jeremiah Love are returning, but also I just think that the personnel is there for them to be able to assert their dominance on the offensive side. And the other thing that really excites me about Notre Dame coming into the year is that while they do lose Riley Leonard at the quarterback position, I actually think they might be set up to be more dynamic with CJ Carr. Now, Riley Leonard obviously was a run-first quarterback, and Notre Dame's offense was predicated around that last season. But with Carr, they may have the ability to actually open things up, and they've got some guys on the outside that could be very dangerous. Malachi Fields comes in from Virginia and was one of the best receivers in the ACC over the past 2 years, and I think that's going to give Notre Dame an opportunity to be more than one-dimensional offensively. So continuing on up through the seeds 1 through 12, we've got the number 3 seed, which I have as the SEC champion, Georgia Bulldogs. Now, Georgia's not getting a lot of attention this year, it seems, from many members of the media. And if I had to guess, I think Kirby Smart would like it that way. They've got a number of guys that are coming back. I think they're going to be much better from a receiving perspective this year. I like what I've seen from the Bulldogs, and I like what I saw from them last season too, but unfortunately things started to unravel with the Carson Beck injury. So it will be interesting to see whether or not they're going to be able to manage the schedule, and they've got some tough games on that schedule. I see them having a chance to play some other teams in the SEC multiple times, and it's going to be tough to do to beat those teams when they do that. But the Georgia Bulldogs are coming in as my SEC champion, and I do think the SEC is going to get the top spot there if they don't. If there aren't any undefeated teams other than Penn State and Notre Dame. Number 4 is a team that I am also really high on, and I think that this one will be interesting from the onset because they've got a really big game coming up here in week 1, and that's the Clemson Tigers. So Clemson is a similar situation to some of these other teams at the top where they have a lot of guys coming back on both sides of the ball. I am a fan of Cade Klubnik. I think he'll be a Heisman contender this year. Really, the only thing that I see as a question mark for Clemson is whether or not they'll be able to replace the rushing productivity from Phil Maffa. But I think they are going to be able to do that. And even if that comes along gradually throughout the season, I think there's enough there offensively for Clemson to be able to not only beat LSU this weekend, but then to take care of the rest of their schedule as well. And that schedule opens up considerably after the LSU game. I look at 2 games on the rest of the schedule as ones where they could potentially lose during the regular season. Those are road games against Louisville and South Carolina. And I do think that the Tigers should have the edge in both of those games. So it should be a good season for Dabo Swinney. I think that if you held on to their stock last year that he told you to buy near the end of 2023, that you're going to be a happy camper. So moving on to number 5, and this is the first team that is not a conference champion and not an independent. So a team that is receiving an at-large, and that would be the Alabama Crimson Tide. And I think Alabama this year is going to be a bounce-back team in a pretty big way. They had a rough season last year in Kalen DeBoer's first season down in Tuscaloosa, and it almost feels like he's on the hot seat a little bit. Now, that would be kind of ridiculous to suggest given that it's only been one season and it was a generally successful season by most accounts. But when you are in the shadow of Nick Saban, expectations are going to be very high, and that's what Kalen DeBoer is dealing with now. But I do think that he's going to get it together. I think you're going to see a lot closer to the offense that you saw from DeBoer in Washington back in 2023 when the Huskies made the national title game. And one of the reasons for that is that his offensive coordinator from that team, Ryan Grubb, returns from his 1-year hiatus from the NFL. So I think that coaching duo is going to put together a really good product down in Tuscaloosa, and I think that they're going to be just fine with the introduction of their new quarterback, having lost Jalen Milroe last season. So the Crimson Tide comes in at number 5 for me. I do see them going 10-2 during the season, so that'll be an interesting thing to note here as we get down towards the end of the 12 that I have listed, is that there are a couple of teams that may be in the running that will have 3 losses. That is one of the conversations that consistently comes up when we talk about the playoff is, will a 3-loss team eventually make the playoff? And under a 12-team scenario, it might be tough because of the number of teams with 2 losses that ultimately will be in the mix. But I've got a surprise there when it comes to that, and I'll share that with you a little bit later as we move through this list. But moving on to number 6, it's another SEC team, so that'll be number 3, where it just means more, and that is the preseason number 1 team, the Texas Longhorns. I do think Texas is going to be in the mix all season. They've obviously got the difficult matchup at the beginning of the season with Ohio State. That is going to be an absolutely great matchup. There's a lot of questions to be answered from both sides, but I do think that both teams are going to learn from whatever happens, and the Longhorns will be fine throughout the season. Arch Manning is going to grow into that offense, and they're going to be able to have a say in the SEC title. I do see the Longhorns making the SEC title game, but losing to Georgia, thus the order that I have those two teams in as far as the playoff is concerned. But Texas will get into the playoff, and I've got them right smack in the middle of this 12-team grouping. So number 7 is the champion of the Big 12, the Iowa State Cyclones. Now, I was a little bit worried about this pick as well going into week 0 because they had a difficult matchup against another team that is being targeted as one of the favorites to win the Big 12, Kansas State. But the Cyclones looked pretty good in a sloppy game. The 2 best passes of the game came from Rocco Becht in that one. He is one of the main reasons why I have the Cyclones winning the Big 12 and getting into the playoff. And it's going to be difficult because the Big 12, as I mentioned in my preview on Around the Corn Sports blog, is going to be a very competitive division this year. And I think that there are going to be a number of teams who are going to have a chance to make that Big 12 title game when we get to late November. But the Cyclones are a consistent team. They beat, presumably, the most consistent team in the Big 12 in Kansas State last week. And I just think that they have an opportunity to do pretty good things under Matt Campbell this season with their quarterback being one of the better and more experienced guys in that league. So moving on to number 8, we've got the defending champions, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, this one is interesting because I actually don't have the Buckeyes even getting to the Big Ten title game this year. And I was looking at that when I made my picks. And for a little bit of background, the way that I make my picks is that I actually go through every team's schedule and I mark down wins and losses for every team. And with the Buckeyes, when I had 2 losses on the schedule that did not include a loss to Texas, I looked at that and I said, well, it doesn't look like they're going to make the Big Ten title game. And that's a surprise, both to me that it ended up that way, but I think it's going to be a surprise to a lot of the listeners as well here, in that the Buckeyes won't get to that game because on paper, they are the number 1 or number 2 team in the Big Ten as far as talent is concerned. Now, they've got some question marks. Running back is going to be an interesting situation this year, having lost 2 guys who made it to the NFL and also having to replace Will Howard. But I do think that the Buckeyes are one of those teams who is going to be able to consistently reload every year, and the base expectation in Columbus is going to be playoff. So the Buckeyes, despite having those 2 losses and not making the Big Ten title game, are going to be in the playoff this year. I do think the brand is going to have something to do with that. But at a 10-win mark, they're definitely deserving based on the way that I see everything else going across the country this year. So at number 9, and this might be the biggest surprise, although they are ranked, I've got the Oklahoma Sooners coming out of the SEC, which makes it the 4th SEC team to make the college football playoff. The Sooners are going to be an exciting case this year. Last year, they were down offensively. They were looking for production at quarterback all season, and they really didn't find it. But they made a big splash in the transfer portal by landing John Mateer out of Washington State. He really does change the entire makeup of this offense. He's a guy who can use his arm to hurt you. He also had, I believe it was over 700 yards rushing last year with the Cougars. He really is a dual threat guy who is going to give the Sooners an excellent opportunity to be in the mix for the SEC title this year. It's a little bit of a hot seat situation in Norman, so if they're not in the running for the playoff this year, I really wonder if Brent Venables is going to be there going into next season. But based on what I'm seeing from the offense, I think that they're going to be in the mix, and Venables will buy himself some extra time to be able to build that program into a consistent SEC winner. So Oklahoma at number 9. Now, I do think that it will be interesting to see how Oklahoma fares against Michigan. Michigan is one of those teams, and spoiler, I don't have them at 10 through 11, so they're not one of the teams that I think is going to make the playoffs, but they are a team who could definitely play spoiler to a number of these teams that I do have. So that game against Michigan is going to be interesting because last year there were some games, specifically the game against USC, that I think Michigan had no business winning, but somehow they were able to pull it out. And they have that ability again this year to do the same thing, to really shock some teams. And I think their offense is one that, while being relatively one-dimensional, and it may be less so this year with Bryce Underwood, I think that they're just so good at what they do that it could be a real problem for teams. And that's an early game that Oklahoma has to face Michigan in. So that's going to be an interesting one for Oklahoma's chances to make the playoff. So at number 11, and this one is a runner-up in the Big Ten, it's the Illinois Fighting Illini. Now, this one it felt like a chic pick back in July when I was really starting to think about putting the Illini in my playoff bracket. It has become less so, definitely. There are a lot of people that are high on the Illini this year, and for good reason. They're one of the most experienced teams in the Big Ten. They have a lot of good things on the defensive side, and I think they're going to be a very difficult team to score on this year. But the biggest thing that I see with Illinois that's going to keep them in the hunt is that they just have one of the coolest customers at quarterback in Altmaier. He is a guy who is not going to be Superman. He's not going to try to be Superman, but he is not going to lose you any game, and he's going to keep you in games too. So the Illini have some difficult battles this year. That game where they host Ohio State in mid-October is, I think, going to be the difference between the Illini and the Buckeyes in terms of who makes the Big Ten title game this year. I do have the Illini winning that game, but it's going to be a really interesting one. And I will say with Illinois, if they are unable to win that game and they end the regular season with 2 losses, they may be a team that, again, narrowly misses the playoff this year. So I think that game is incredibly important to Illinois, obviously important to Ohio State as well, but obviously, given that I have Ohio State in the playoff as well, less so than I think it is for the Illini. And then number 11, and this one I went back and forth on. I had 2 teams, and I actually have one scratched out, and I left the other one in here. So I'll give you who I thought was that team that could have filled the spot as well. But I do have the Utah Utes in the number 11 spot. And I have Utah losing the Big 12 title game to Iowa State, but I do have Utah by way of tiebreakers coming into the Big 12 title game as the number 1 team in the Big 12. So that's where I kind of went back and forth here with the Utes, is that they're going to get to the Big 12 title game by my estimation, and are they going to leave a team that will only have 2 losses going into that game out of the playoff in favor of a team that did not make their conference title game, which would be the Texas A&M Aggies. That's who I have as that, call it number 13 team, if you will, who I don't have in the playoff, but I could definitely see the Aggies being right there. And if we're looking at having this year's playoff be determined by the rankings, the Aggies could be in front of Utah if Utah does not win the Big 12 title game. Utah is not coming in as a ranked team this season. They've got some landmines that they've got to navigate on their schedule. I really like what I'm seeing from Mike Elko and that offense this year at Texas A&M. I think that Marcel Reed is going to be one of the most dynamic players in the country, and it'll be interesting to see what happens if Utah gets to the Big 12 title game and loses, and therefore would have a 3rd loss on their schedule, whether or not we would see a team that did not make their conference title game jump Utah, post-championship weekend, because that's essentially what I would be suggesting would have to happen, is that Utah would need to actually fall in the rankings following a loss in a title game. And last year was a good example of this, where we saw SMU get into their title game and lose to Clemson, but still make the playoff. Right now, the things that we have seen from 1 year of a 12-team playoff would suggest that a team that gets into their title game is going to be given the nod over a team that does not. So that's why I ultimately went with the Utes in this spot, but I could certainly see it being another team, especially with Utah needing to kind of work their way into position to be a team that will get the benefit of the doubt. So there you have it. You've got my 12 teams. It's heavy on SEC. We've got 4 SEC teams, 3 Big Ten teams, 2 Big 12 teams, and then 1 from the rest of the conferences that'll be featured. Now, if you haven't been following along, and I don't know why you would be, this is my job to do that, the matchups that you'd be looking at in the first rounds would be the following. You'd have the 12 seed, presumably Boise State Broncos, but put an asterisk there and put whomever you want from the group of 5, taking on the number 5 Alabama Crimson Tide. So I think the Crimson Tide would likely get into the quarterfinal there. The next game would be a real big matchup and would be very interesting just from a historical perspective, based on what we've seen in the past. You'd have the number 9 Oklahoma Sooners against the defending champions, number 8 seed Ohio State Buckeyes. And that one would be very interesting because that's actually the position that the Buckeyes were in last year, that 8-9 game. And that winner would also then take on the Big Ten title winner, Penn State. So there's a lot setting up there that would be pretty similar to last season for the Buckeyes. So that one would be, I think, a huge storyline if it were to happen. The Buckeyes having a chance to potentially go back-to-back from the same starting spot as they had last year. In that 11-6 matchup, you'd have Utah against the Texas Longhorns. I do think Texas would have the ability to win that game. Sarkisian, he's going to have a very good team this year. I think Utah would be somewhat of a surprise to make the playoff, and I just don't know if Kyle Whittingham's strong defense would be enough to be able to slow down what should be a pretty potent Texas offense this year. And then the last of the first round games would be the 10-7 matchup, and you'd have in the number 10 spot Illinois against the number 7 team, Iowa State. So that would be a really interesting game too. I think it would be pretty similar styles that you would get from both teams. The winner would be taking on Notre Dame in the 2 spot. So I would actually go as far as to say this game is almost an opportunity to take on a team that they would eventually lose to. But that one I would see as probably the biggest toss-up in the first round if you don't want to include Ohio State and Oklahoma in that category. So there you have it. You've got my 12 teams. You've got Penn State and Notre Dame going undefeated, and that would be a pretty big deal if you had 2 teams this year run the table. Admittedly, I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but again, based on the schedules, I think both of those teams absolutely have the opportunity to do it, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not James Franklin will be able to handle that pressure of being a team that is being pegged as good enough to run the table, or if they'll have yet another instance of disappointment at Happy Valley. But I will say, of the 12 teams that are my picks to make the playoffs, there are 2 that stand above the rest for me, based on the way that bracket would look. And those 2 teams are Notre Dame and Clemson. And I see so much talent on the Clemson team that it's going to be difficult for anybody to handle them in the regular season. I think as a result, they're going to come in with a good seed And then those matchups that they have, if they were to end up as a 4 seed, I think would benefit them as well, heading into the national title game. And then Notre Dame, I was just really impressed last year with the way that Marcus Freeman was able to get that team together. I thought that they were going to lose the game against Georgia in the quarterfinals, and then they were nearly losing. They were basically going to lose that game against Penn State as well, before the untimely interception near the end of regulation. And I think that Notre Dame is going to be able to make a serious run at getting back to that national title game. Now, once they get there, will they have the talent to be able to take on what should be one of the most talented teams in the country? We'll see. I think that Notre Dame is still in a position where, they might be a quarter step below a number of these other teams that are going to be regular contenders for the national title, but getting there is more than half the battle. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not Marcus Freeman can do that with his team this season. But that's all I've got for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed it. As I said, it's going to be a little bit of a rough ride here at the beginning. Hopefully some of the stumbles and bumbles didn't make you turn this off and you're still here with me. We'll improve upon that. We'll have some fun. Again, I'd love to hear from you guys, hear what you liked about the podcast, hear what you didn't like about the podcast, and send me some of your thoughts my way as well. Cornversationspod@gmail.com. I'd love to make the mailbag a regular occurrence on this show and give you guys a chance to interact with us as well. So signing off for episode number 1, I am Becks. Until next time, take it easy, shuckers.